There are places in the American Midwest where the land stretches so flat and wide that the horizon seems to swallow everything whole, including answers. Places where a child can be there one moment and the next, simply gone. Where the corn is tall and the roads are long and the silence between neighbors carries the weight of everything unsaid. On the morning of August 14, 1994, in a modest rural community outside of Findlay, Ohio, a small town in Hancock County, population just under 40,000, known for its petroleum history and its quiet, unhurried pace. A 4-year-old boy named Daniel Ray Brooks walked out the back door of his family's single-story home on a sun-scorched Tuesday and did not walk back in. His mother, 31-year-old Patricia Brooks, reported him missing to the Hancock County Sheriff's Office at approximately 2:17 in the afternoon. By nightfall, more than 100 volunteers had combed the surrounding fields, the creek bank, the neighbor's overgrown lot, the stretch of gravel road that wound north toward the Route 12 intersection. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a jacket, not a single thread. Daniel Brooks weighed 41 pounds. He had brown eyes, a small gap between his 2 front teeth that his grandmother said made him look like a little jack-o'-lantern, and a red toy truck he carried almost everywhere. The truck was found on the back porch, lying on its side, its plastic wheels still spinning faintly in the summer breeze when the first deputy arrived. The swing in the backyard hung perfectly still. And the question that would haunt Hancock County for the next 11 years was this: how does a 4-year-old boy disappear from a fenced backyard in broad daylight and leave behind every single thing he loved? To understand what happened to Daniel Brooks, you have to first understand the world he lived in, not the dramatic version, the ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday morning version. The Brooks family home sat on a gravel lane called Wilker Road, approximately 4 miles southeast of Findlay's main commercial corridor. It was a rented property, 3 bedrooms, olive green aluminum siding, a detached garage that leaned slightly westward like a man too tired to stand straight. The yard was enclosed on 3 sides by a 5-foot chain-link fence, and on the 4th by a row of overgrown forsythia bushes that had gone unpruned for at least 2 seasons. There was a small concrete patio off the back door, a rusting metal swing set with 2 swings, and a sandbox that had grown more weed than sand. Daniel's father, 34-year-old Gary Brooks, worked as a line technician for the local electric utility company. He left for work most mornings before 6, driving a blue 1989 Ford F-150 with a cracked passenger side mirror. He was, by most accounts, a steady man, not given to great emotion in either direction, the kind of man who fixed things when they broke and didn't speak much about anything else. His coworkers at Findlay Electric described him as dependable. His bowling teammates at the Westgate Lanes described him as quiet. His neighbor of 3 years, a retired schoolteacher named Elma Rutherford, described him simply as a man who kept to himself. Patricia Brooks, Patty, to the people who knew her, worked part-time at a dry cleaning business on Tiffin Avenue, Monday through Thursday, 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. She was described by friends as warm, chatty, a woman who laughed easily and worried often. She had a habit of chewing the inside of her cheek when she was anxious, a detail her sister Linda would later recall with great precision. Patty loved her children with the kind of ferocity that was obvious to anyone who spent more than 20 minutes in her presence. Daniel was her second child. Her first, a daughter named Cassie, was 8 years old in the summer of 1994. Cassie attended Bigelow Elementary and had, according to her teacher Mrs. Hartman, just been identified as a gifted reader. Cassie and Daniel shared a bedroom with twin beds separated by a small wooden nightstand. On the nightstand sat a ceramic lamp shaped like a frog and a framed photograph of the two children at a Lake Erie beach the previous summer, Daniel mid-laugh, Cassie squinting into the sun. August 14, 1994, was a Sunday. Wait, let the record be corrected here, because precision matters in a case like this. It was a Sunday that began like every Sunday the Brooks family had known that summer, slow-moving and warm, with the particular heaviness of late August Ohio heat that settles over everything before 9 in the morning and doesn't lift until well after dark. The temperature that day reached 91 degrees by noon. The sky was cloudless. Gary Brooks had taken Cassie to his mother's home in Bluffton, approximately 22 miles north of Findlay, for what was described as a routine Sunday visit. He left the house at approximately 10:15 in the morning. Patty and Daniel remained behind. Patty had told her husband she wasn't feeling well, a headache, she said, and perhaps the start of a summer cold. She planned to rest. According to Patty's statement to investigators, she put Daniel down for an early nap at around 11:30 that morning. He was tired, she said, rubbing his eyes and dragging his red truck behind him. She tucked him in, lowered the blinds, turned on the box fan in the corner, and went to lie down herself in the master bedroom down the hall. She left the bedroom doors of both rooms open, as was her habit, so she could hear if he woke and called for her. She said she fell asleep. She said she woke at approximately 1:45 in the afternoon, went to check on Daniel and found his bed empty. She called his name, she checked the bathroom, she checked the living room and kitchen. She went to the back door, which she said she found unlatched, not open, she stressed, but unlatched, and stepped onto the patio. The yard was empty. The red truck lay on the patio, wheels up, as though it had been set down in a hurry or knocked over. The swing set stood still. The forsythia bushes rustled in the faint wind. There was no sign of Daniel Ray Brooks anywhere. Patty said she called his name 3 more times, walking the perimeter of the fenced yard. She looked down the gravel lane in both directions. She knocked on Elma Rutherford's door next door. She called her sister Linda. And then, at 2:17 p.m., she called the Hancock County Sheriff's Office. The first deputy to respond was a 26-year-old named Mark Tesler, who had been with the department less than 18 months. He arrived at the Brooks residence at 2:29 p.m. He would later testify that the scene appeared calm and orderly. There were no signs of disturbance inside or outside the home. The back door bore no damage. The fence gate was closed and latched. There was no evidence of forced entry anywhere on the property. He also noted, in his initial report, one detail that would resurface again and again in the years that followed. Mother appeared controlled, tearful but controlled, showed no signs of distress until prompted by questioning. He wrote it down as an observation, not an accusation. At 2:29 in the afternoon on a Sunday in August, with the heat still pressing down and the corn standing tall in the field behind the road, it was simply something he noticed. A 4-year-old boy was missing, the swing hung still, the toy truck lay on its side. And the search had just begun. By 4:00 in the afternoon on August 14, 1994, the Hancock County Sheriff's Office had mobilized a search team of 14 personnel, including 2 K-9 units. By 5:30, the first wave of community volunteers had arrived, neighbors, church members, the families of Patty's coworkers from the dry cleaning shop, 2 off-duty firefighters from the Findlay station on Lima Avenue. By 8:00 that evening, the number had grown to over 120 people, walking in organized lines through the adjacent cornfield, along the creek that ran parallel to the county road, through the vacant lot to the south, and down the length of Wilker Road itself in both directions. The K-9 units were given a piece of Daniel's clothing, a small blue cotton shirt from his laundry basket. The dogs worked from the back porch outward, circling, tracking, straining at their leads. And then they stopped. Both dogs, working independently, stopped near the back gate of the fence and showed what handlers described as confusion, an interruption of scent, as if the trail simply ended at the gate rather than continuing beyond it. Sergeant Dale Frisch, who had 17 years with the department and who led the initial search operation, would later say in a 2003 interview with the Findlay Courier, "In my experience, when a child wanders, the dogs follow. They don't stop. They don't get confused. When both dogs stopped at that gate and couldn't move beyond it with any confidence, that told me something. I didn't say it out loud that night, but it told me something." Gary Brooks returned from Bluffton at approximately 6:45 that evening, having been reached by phone at his mother's house. He arrived with Cassie, who was kept inside the home with a family friend while the search continued outside. Gary walked the perimeter of his property twice, spoke briefly with Sergeant Frisch, and then stood at the edge of the patio in the descending dusk, arms crossed, watching the searchers move through the cornfield. He did not join the search. His stated reason was that he needed to stay near Cassie. Those who were present that evening noted different things about Gary Brooks. Elma Rutherford told investigators she watched him from her kitchen window and thought he looked like a man waiting for something. A volunteer searcher named Carol Bynum, who had known the family from church, recalled that Gary accepted a cup of coffee from a neighbor without making eye contact, and that he held it for a long time without drinking from it. A deputy named James Wollerton wrote in his notes, "Father cooperative. Statements concise. No apparent emotional elevation." Patty Brooks, by contrast, was described by nearly everyone as visibly distressed, alternately weeping, packing, and asking the same questions over and over. Where could he go? Why would he open the gate? He knew he wasn't supposed to. He knew. The search continued through the night by flashlight and lantern. By dawn on August 15, they had covered an estimated 6-square-mile radius without finding any trace of Daniel. No clothing, no footprints, no physical evidence of any kind beyond the back porch where the red truck lay. A second search on August 15 expanded the radius and included 2 additional K-9 teams from the neighboring Allen County Sheriff's Office. A dive team checked a retention pond approximately 3/4 of a mile from the property. They found nothing. Local and regional media picked up the story on August 16. The Findlay Courier ran the story on page 1. A Toledo television station sent a crew. The family provided a school photograph of Daniel, round-faced, gap-toothed, wearing a striped polo shirt, and it was broadcast across northwestern Ohio. Tips came into the sheriff's office at a rate of roughly 15 to 20 per day in the first week. Each one was followed up. Each one led nowhere. Investigators interviewed Patricia Brooks 3 times in the first week, each session longer and more detailed than the last. Her account remained consistent: the nap, the open back door, the empty yard. She never wavered on the timeline, never added details unprompted, never changed the sequence of events. This consistency was noted by investigators. In most missing child cases, parents recall additional details over time: a sound they heard, a feeling something was wrong, a moment they nearly checked on the child and didn't. Patty Brooks recalled nothing new. Her account was identical across all 3 interviews, as though it had been practiced into smoothness. Deputies whispered quietly to each other in the parking lot of the sheriff's office. Not accusations, observations. The way Patty had described waking up, the precision of her timeline, the fact that the back door was unlatched but not open, how a 4-year-old who was asleep and tired would have had the coordination to unlatch a door that required a thumb press on a metal lever, how the K-9 units found nothing beyond the gate. Gary Brooks was interviewed as well twice in the first 2 weeks, once more in September. He was cooperative to the point of being almost bureaucratic. He answered questions directly, asked no questions of his own, expressed no anger at the investigators, no impatience with the process. When asked how he was coping, he said he was taking it one day at a time. When asked if he had any idea what might have happened to Daniel, he said, "No, single word. Still eyes." Physical examination of the Brooks home on August 17, a consensual search for which Gary signed the paperwork without hesitation, revealed nothing forensically significant. No blood, no signs of struggle. Daniel's bedroom was neat. His shoes were under his bed. His jacket hung on a hook by the front door. The red truck, processed for prints, yielded only Daniel's own. By the end of August 1994, the Hancock County Sheriff's Office had no suspects, no physical evidence, no witnesses, and no body. The FBI had been contacted but had not formally taken over the investigation. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had Daniel's information in their database. His face was on posters in diners, laundromats, gas stations, and grocery stores from Findlay to Columbus. And then, gradually, the calls slowed. The tips dried up. The media moved on to other stories. The volunteers went back to their lives. The cornfield that had held so many desperate searchers in the heat of August stood empty and unharvested through September and into October, its stalks turning brown and brittle in the cooling air. The investigation did not close. Cases involving missing children do not formally close. But by the winter of 1994, it had slowed to a trickle of activity, a periodic review of the file, a returned call here, a follow-up there. Sergeant Dale Frisch kept the file on his desk for 2 full years before it was moved to the cold case cabinet. He moved it himself. He said later that he stood at the cabinet for a long time before he closed the drawer. Time does not heal all wounds. Sometimes time simply buries things deeper. By the spring of 1995, Gary and Patricia Brooks had separated. The separation was quiet and uncontested. Patty moved with Cassie to her sister Linda's home in Bowling Green, a college town approximately 25 miles northeast of Findlay, while Gary remained on Wilker Road for another 4 months before surrendering the lease and moving into a studio apartment near the utility company where he worked. The house on Wilker Road was re-rented by November 1995 to a family from out of state who knew nothing of its history. The separation was attributed publicly to the strain of losing a child. Those who knew the family well attributed it to something else, to the way Gary and Patty stopped looking at each other at some point during the fall of 1994, to the silence that moved into the space where Daniel used to be and refused to leave. Linda, Patty's sister, would say years later in a recorded statement, "It wasn't a marriage that exploded. It was a marriage that went quiet. One day they just weren't talking about anything real anymore. And when you can't talk about the most real thing in your life, what's left?" The divorce was finalized in March 1996. There was no dispute over assets. Cassie remained with her mother. Gary's visitation was arranged but, according to family members, irregularly observed. He would sometimes not appear for scheduled visits. When he did come, he and Cassie sat in the car or walked in a park and spoke about small things, school, TV shows, the weather. He never, as far as anyone could recall, spoke about Daniel. For those who have ever doubted someone they love, really doubted them in the deep and wordless way that doubt operates, you understand something about what Patty Brooks carried through those years. It was not a clean grief. It was complicated by questions she could not ask out loud, by things she noticed in retrospect that she had dismissed in the moment, by the way Gary had stood on the patio that August evening with his arms crossed, watching the searchers move through the corn, by his single-word answers, by his still eyes. She did not voice these doubts in 1994. She did not voice them in 1995. She carried them the way you carry something heavy enough to change your posture, quietly, invisibly, but at great cost to the body. Cassie Brooks was 8 years old when her brother disappeared. She was 10 when her parents divorced. She was 12 when she began drawing the same image over and over in the margins of her school notebooks, a small figure, always the same, always in the same position, lying down, arms at its sides, in a dark space. Her school counselor, a woman named Patricia Dunmeyer, noticed the drawings and spoke with them in the gentle, careful language of grief counseling. She noted in her records that Cassie insisted the figure was just a person sleeping. She repeated this explanation every time she was asked. She said it the way children repeat things they have been told to say. At 13, Cassie began having nightmares serious enough to wake the household. She would sit up in bed, Linda recalled, with her eyes open but unseeing, saying the same thing. "He's under the floor." She never remembered these episodes in the morning. When asked about them gently, she shook her head and changed the subject. Linda watched her niece navigate childhood with a particular weight on her shoulders, a weight that showed in the way Cassie laughed a half-second later than other children, as though she was always checking first whether it was safe to be happy. Linda watched her sister Patty sit at the kitchen table at night with a cup of tea that went cold while she stared at nothing. She watched Patty call the Hancock County Sheriff's Office once a year, every August, to ask if there was anything new in Daniel's case. There never was. In 1998, 4 years after Daniel's disappearance, an investigator from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation named Thomas Calloway reviewed the cold case file as part of a statewide initiative to re-examine unsolved missing child cases. He interviewed Patty, Gary, and several of the original witnesses. He reviewed the K-9 reports, the forensic examination notes, the interview transcripts. He flagged 2 items for further attention: the behavior of the search dogs at the fence gate, and a single discrepancy in Gary Brooks's timeline that had not been fully explored in the original investigation. Gary had stated that he left for his mother's house in Bluffton at approximately 10:15 a.m. on August 14, 1994. His mother, Helen Brooks, confirmed he arrived at her home at approximately 11:00. The drive from Wilker Road to his mother's home in Bluffton measured 22 miles on the most direct route. At the speed limits posted along that route, the drive should have taken approximately 28 to 32 minutes. The gap between Gary's stated departure of 10:15 and his confirmed arrival of 11:00 represented a window of 45 minutes, 15 to 17 minutes longer than the drive required. In 1994, this discrepancy had been noted and then set aside, attributed to possible stops for gas or a slow drive. It had never been followed up with a direct question to Gary Brooks about where he had been during those extra minutes. Investigator Calloway's 1998 review flagged this gap. He attempted to schedule a follow-up interview with Gary Brooks. Gary Brooks, now living in the studio apartment on Elm Street in Findlay, declined through an attorney he had retained. His attorney stated that Gary had cooperated fully with the original investigation and had nothing further to add. The BCI review produced no new evidence sufficient to reopen the case formally. Investigator Calloway submitted his report, noted the unresolved timeline gap in his findings, and the file went back into the cold case cabinet. In the fall of 2001, Cassie Brooks turned 15. She was, by all accounts, a quiet, watchful teenager, good in school, few close friends, prone to long silences. She had grown up with a ghost in the house, the ghost of her brother and the ghost of something her mother had never said out loud but which had lived in their home like a low electrical hum since the August she was 8 years old. That fall, Cassie began asking her mother questions, not about Daniel, about her father. Where had Gary been that morning? What time did he leave? Did her mother know for certain that Gary had taken Cassie to Bluffton and not left early? Patty did not answer these questions directly. She said it was complicated. She said some things were better left alone. Cassie Brooks, at 15, looked at her mother and understood that complicated was not an answer. It was a closed door. And she began, very quietly and very deliberately, to look for the key. The case of Daniel Ray Brooks officially reopened on March 7, 2005, 10 years, 6 months, and 21 days after his disappearance, as the result of a statement given to the Hancock County Sheriff's Office by a 19-year-old woman named Cassie Brooks. Clear's throat. She had turned 19 in October 2004. She had spent the previous 3 years in a careful, methodical process that she would later describe in an interview as trying to understand what I already knew. She had written things down. She had reconstructed timelines. She had spoken, cautiously and indirectly, with 2 people from her early childhood, a neighbor's daughter who had been 12 in the summer of 1994, and who remembered seeing Gary Brooks's truck on Wilker Road that morning, and a man named Dennis Carl who had worked with Gary at the utility company, and who, in a conversation at a family gathering in 2003, had mentioned offhandedly that Gary had shown up late to work on a Monday in mid-August 1994. Not a Sunday, which was Gary's day off and the day of Daniel's disappearance, but the following Monday, looking, in Dennis Carl's words, like he hadn't slept and didn't want anyone to ask him why. Cassie brought all of this to the sheriff's office in March 2005. She brought it in a folder. She had organized it like someone who had been preparing to walk into that building for years because she had been. The detective who received her statement, a 20-year veteran named Rod Altman who had been with the department since 1985, listened to her for 2.5 hours without interruption. He later recalled, she was precise. She wasn't emotional in the way you'd expect. She was methodical. She knew exactly what she was saying and why she was saying it. And the thing that stayed with me was this. She kept saying, I need someone to ask the right questions this time. The Hancock County Sheriff's Office contacted the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation the following week. The BCI assigned an investigative team, which included Calloway, now a senior agent, who had reviewed the file in 1998 and had never stopped thinking about the timeline gap. Over the next 4 months, investigators conducted new interviews, sought new warrants, and pursued several lines of inquiry that the original 1994 investigation had not fully developed. Among these, a search of property records associated with Gary Brooks's family, which revealed that his uncle, a man named Roy Ketterman, owned a 12-acre parcel of land in a rural section of Hardin County, approximately 8 miles east of the Bluffton exit off State Route 15. The parcel included a drainage ditch, an old collapsed outbuilding, and a section of disturbed ground near the northeast corner of the property that neighbors had noticed as far back as the fall of 1994 and attributed to burrowing animals. The BCI obtained a warrant for the Ketterman property in July 2005. Cadaver-trained search dogs were deployed on July 19, 2005. They alerted on the northeast corner of the property within 40 minutes of beginning their sweep. Excavation of that location on July 21, 2005, conducted by the BCI Evidence Recovery Unit in coordination with the Hardin County Coroner's Office, yielded the skeletal remains of a small child. The remains were recovered over a period of approximately 6 hours by a team of 8, working in the heavy heat of a July afternoon in a field that smelled of clay and old grass, and something else that none of the team members later wanted to describe in detail. The remains were wrapped carefully and transported to the state medical examiner's office in Columbus. Forensic odontological analysis of the remains, completed on August 3, 2005, confirmed a match to Daniel Ray Brooks. He had been identified by, among other things, a small gap between his two front teeth. The medical examiner's findings, released in summary form to the public on August 12, 2005, one day before the 11-year anniversary of his disappearance, confirmed that Daniel Ray Brooks had not wandered from his yard, had not been taken by a stranger, had not drowned in a retention pond or been lost in a cornfield. The findings indicated that Daniel had been transported from the Wilker Road property and interred at the Ketterman parcel. The specific manner of his passing was not released in the public summary out of respect for the family and the integrity of the pending legal proceedings. The medical examiner's report, in its confidential full version, used language that was clinical and precise and absolutely devastating. Gary Allen Brooks was arrested on the morning of August 15, 2005, 11 years and 1 day after his son was reported missing, at his apartment on Elm Street in Findlay. He was taken into custody by 2 BCI agents and 2 Hancock County Sheriff's deputies at 7:14 in the morning. He was, by all accounts, dressed and seated at his kitchen table as though he had been expecting them. He did not speak when the agents entered. He did not ask questions. He stood when directed, placed his hands behind his back, and walked out of the apartment without looking back. His attorney later stated that Gary Brooks maintained his innocence throughout the subsequent legal process. The attorney said, and he repeated this in multiple press statements, that Gary was a grieving father who had been victimized by the loss of his child, and was now being additionally victimized by an investigation built on circumstantial evidence and the speculative testimony of a young woman who had been too small to know anything about what had happened in 1994. The public reaction in Findlay and the surrounding communities was, in the language of the local newspaper, a community divided. There were those, a significant number of them, who had always believed Gary Brooks was involved. These were neighbors who remembered his still eyes and crossed arms on the evening of August 14, 1994. These were people who had sat in the pews of First Lutheran Church and watched Gary accept condolences with a composure that felt, to them, wrong in a way they could not fully articulate but also could not dismiss. These were the people who had whispered in parking lots and diners for 11 years, who had never said anything because they had nothing concrete to point to, and who now felt the particular relief of the vindicated, a relief that comes wrapped in grief, because being right about something like this is never something anyone wanted to be right about. And there were others, fewer but present, who struggled with what they were being asked to accept. These were Gary's coworkers, who knew him as dependable, his bowling teammates who knew him as quiet. His mother, Helen Brooks, who would say publicly through her own attorney that she did not believe her son was capable of what he was being accused of, and who would attend every day of the trial that followed, sitting in the third row of the gallery with her hands folded and her face composed into an expression that resisted easy interpretation. For those who have ever watched someone they trusted be accused of something unthinkable, you understand the particular agony of that position, not defending the indefensible, but simply being unable in the deepest part of yourself to reconcile the person you knew with the thing being described. It is a grief of its own kind. It does not excuse the accused, but it is real, and it is suffered, and it deserves acknowledgement. The trial of Gary Allen Brooks commenced in the Hancock County Common Pleas Court on January 9, 2006. It lasted 17 days. The prosecution, led by Assistant Prosecutor Diane Hallbeck, built its case on the recovered remains, the forensic findings of the state medical examiner, the BCI's investigative work connecting Gary to the Ketterman property, and the critical timeline discrepancy that had been noted in 1994, flagged in 1998, and finally fully interrogated in 2005. The prosecution established that Gary Brooks had driven to the Ketterman property, a location he knew well, having visited his uncle there multiple times throughout his childhood and adult life, and had arrived in Bluffton at his mother's home approximately 15 to 17 minutes later than the drive from the Ketterman property to her house would have taken, consistent with a stop there before proceeding. His uncle, Roy Ketterman, testified that Gary had a key to the property and knew the layout of the land. Dennis Carl testified about Gary's appearance on the Monday following Daniel's disappearance. He looked, Carl said from the witness stand, choosing his words with the deliberateness of a man who understood the weight of what he was saying, like he was holding something inside that was going to break him if he let it out. The most significant testimony came from Cassie Brooks herself, now 19 and seated in the witness box in a navy blue blouse, her hands flat on the railing in front of her. She testified in a clear, measured voice about the nightmares, about the drawings, about the things she had known without knowing that she knew them. She testified about a memory, one she had spent years questioning, years wondering if she had constructed it from fear and grief, of waking very early on the morning of August 14, 1994, before her father took her to Bluffton, and seeing him outside the window of their shared bedroom. She was 8 years old. She was half asleep. She did not fully understand what she saw, but she saw her father in the backyard in the gray morning light, and she saw him carrying something. She did not say what the something was. She said only that she had carried that image for 11 years like a stone in her chest, and that she had brought it here to this room, because her brother deserved someone to carry it all the way. There was no sound in the courtroom when she finished speaking, not crying, not whispering, just a silence that lasted long enough to mean something. Gary Brooks did not testify in his own defense. On January 31, 2006, the jury of 8 women and 4 men returned a verdict of guilty on all counts after deliberating for 9 hours and 40 minutes. When the verdict was read, Gary Brooks stood at the defense table with the same still eyes and composed posture that had marked every significant moment of this case. From the August evening he stood on his patio watching searchers move through the corn, to the morning he sat at his kitchen table and waited for them to come for him, to this moment now, in a courtroom with fluorescent lights and wooden benches, and the weight of 11 years pressing down on everything. He did not react to the verdict, not visibly. His attorney placed a hand briefly on his arm, and Gary Brooks looked at it for a moment and then looked away. He was sentenced on March 3, 2006, to a term of 15 years to life. He was transported to the Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ross County, Ohio, on March 14, 2006. He was 46 years old. Patricia Brooks was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. She had attended portions of the trial, but had not been able to remain for the final days. Her sister Linda said later that Patty had sat in her car in the parking lot of the courthouse for a long time after leaving the gallery on the last day she attended. She did not say what she was thinking. Linda did not ask. There are things about the case of Daniel Ray Brooks that no verdict can fully address. No sentence can restore what was lost. No forensic report can give back the swing-set summer, the gap-toothed laugh, the red toy truck that still sits somewhere in an evidence box, its plastic wheels long since stilled. What the case of Daniel Ray Brooks gave to Hancock County, and to the broader conversation about how we investigate the disappearances of children, was a harder, more uncomfortable truth. It reminded investigators and communities alike that the most dangerous assumptions in any investigation are the ones that go unexamined. The timeline gap that was noticed in 1994 and set aside without follow-up. The K-9 behavior that was logged and then treated as anomaly rather than evidence. The emotional composure of a parent that was observed, noted, and then politely dismissed as individual difference. It reminded us that children who carry impossible knowledge sometimes carry it in the only language available to them, in drawings in the margins of notebooks, in sleep words spoken to dark ceilings, in the way they grow up a little sideways from the rest of the world, because the weight they're bearing is not proportionate to their size. Cassie Brooks, who did not give her brother justice alone, but who walked into the Hancock County Sheriff's Office at 19 years old with a folder of carefully assembled notes and the courage to say, "I need someone to ask the right questions this time," lives in Ohio still. She has not spoken publicly about the case since the trial. She does not need to. She already said everything she needed to say. Clears throat. Daniel Ray Brooks was 4 years old. He had brown eyes and a gap-toothed smile, and a red toy truck he carried almost everywhere. He deserved to grow up. He deserved to become whatever he was going to become, a boy with bad jokes and scraped knees, a teenager with a driver's license and a borrowed car, a man with a life that stretched out ahead of him as wide and flat and full of possibility as the Ohio horizon he never got to see. He deserved to be heard. He was finally heard. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard. The names of certain peripheral individuals have been composited or altered to protect privacy. All investigative details, forensic findings, and legal proceedings described in this documentary script are based on the factual public record of this case. Daniel Ray Brooks is remembered.